Last week, we ended our discussion about actions and consequences with a hint to the shift in position two major characters go through during Hunter x Hunter's Chimera Ant arc. Gon, the vessel through which we've experienced most of the story, and Meruem, the king of the Chimera Ants, act as exact opposites to one another, without ever coming into direct contact. Gon starts the story as the carefree, modest, and just generally likable protagonist. He easily sways others to his way of thinking by just being himself. In a way, he's very much a paragon of humanity. That's a term we've thrown around a few times, but what do I mean when I say it? Outside of referring to the human race, people use the word humanity as a way of describing the benevolence in someone's character. Think of someone's humanity as a metaphorical measurement of their overall kindness and compassion. Gon has this in spades, finding ways to connect with people emotionally, often helping them become better or happier versions of themselves. Of course, the best example of this being his influence on Killua. Gon always looks for ways to defeat his opponents without killing them, even when his life is on the line, like the way it is when he handles Bomber at the end of the Greed Island arc. He would rather give his all finding a way to win without killing his opponent than even consider it as an option. Gon even extends that desire for a better way to the people around him. It was Gon that inspired Killua to want to give up the assassin life that he'd known for so long, and when Kurapika was on the verge of staining his own hands with blood, it was Gon, with the help of Killua, that actively went along with a hostage exchange to stop Kurapika from killing their enemy. In Gon's own words, so there's no shortage of Gon putting his own humanity on display during most of the run of the anime, but once the ball really gets rolling in the Chimera Ant arc, that humanity is strained considerably. Gon's first test comes when he has his first real battle with a Chimera Ant. Kite, being a seasoned pro, reminds Gon and Killua that they need to fight with the intent to kill because that's what their enemies will be doing. After seeing just how tough his opponent is, Gon switches up his tactics to snag the W, but he fails to notice the enemy isn't dead and Kite comes to the rescue, instructing Gon to go for the head from then on. Not much later, Gon laments the fact that the Chimera Ants see their weaker peers as trash and uses this argument to maintain the moral high ground. Yet, Kite warns against empathizing with the enemy, wanting Gon to maintain his emotional disconnect. The alternative would mean Gon would hesitate to kill the enemy when the moment came. Of course, the biggest strain on Gon's humanity is what happens to Kite at the hands of Pito. We'll circle back to Gon after we discuss his antithesis, Meruem. Meruem is born as the next king of the Chimera Ants, standing far and away as the single most powerful ant in the species. To say his power is unrivaled would be a massive understatement. From the moment he is born, Meruem oozes an air of superiority and even disregards the health and well-being of his own mother in his haste to walk the planet, leaving her broken and dying without so much as a second thought. He commands the respect of his subordinates and lacks any empathy for humans. To him, they're nothing more than livestock, and in his first interaction with humans, he doesn't waste a single second decapitating the adults that happen to be in his sights. Their lives mean nothing to him, and he makes a comment about the fact that they didn't even put up a fight. If we fast forward a bit to when Meruem storms the palace that would eventually become his stronghold, there's an excitement to him when he comes across a Nen user. To the ants, humans come in two types, the basic ones, which are just normal humans, and the rare ones, which are Nen users. Consuming Nen users makes the ants more powerful and provide a better taste, so they're seen as a delicacy. For the king, it's an opportunity not only for a tasty treat, but to test his combat abilities. It isn't long before the palace is taken and Meruem is in control. One of the first things we see him do is mock a small crowd of women who beg for their lives. He taunts them by criticizing their intelligence and asking them if they've ever spared a pig or a cow that they intended to eat, once again hammering in the idea that they're just livestock to him. Their fears, hopes, dreams, talents, their very lives mean nothing to him in the same way a pig's doesn't before it's turned into delicious, glorious bacon. His utter lack of concern for anything except his own goals and complete absence of kindness or compassion are what make him such a stark contrast to someone like Gon. Every primary antagonist up to this point in the story has had some redeeming qualities, however veiled they may have been. Hisoka, in a strange way, cares about Gon and even Killua. Despite being framed to the audience as cold-blooded criminals, the spiders all care about each other, sporting unique, amusing, and oftentimes surprisingly touching friendships. Even Bomber shows concern for his teammates every now and again during the Greed Island arc. Meruem is the only antagonist that stands disconnected from the people around him. At one point, Meruem even strikes Pito for offering him simple advice. He comments that she must be stronger than she looks because he intended to take her head off. It's this kind of behavior that gives the audience something to root against. The show gives you something to chomp on by setting an extremely high bar in terms of the enemy's threat level, so you can't help but anticipate what the showdown between the king and his eventual opponent will be like. Most people, at this stage in the game, would assume that Gon and Meruem are on a crash course, barreling toward each other at breakneck speed, but that never happens. The show takes these two characters and sets them on mirrored arcs, but never places them at direct odds with each other. Meruem is never Gon's obstacle, and Gon is never Meruem's. Imagine the two moving toward each other from opposite ends of a road. In the story structure of a battle anime, the point in which these two meet in the middle of the road would typically be the point in which the named parties collide. With Hunter x Hunter, the characters move right by one another to occupy the space formerly held by the other. Instead of being the point of conflict with each other, the midpoint of their path represents the inciting incidents that lead them to exchanging places. For Gon, that incident is the defeat and subsequent death of Kite. For Meruem, the inciting incident comes in the form of a blind woman named Komugi. We've already spent some time last week explaining why Kite was so pivotal in Gon's arc during this portion of the anime, so we'll focus on Meruem and Komugi to provide some context. Meruem wasn't satisfied with simply being the most physically powerful. He also wanted to test his intellect in games against humans who were considered masters of their fields. He soundly defeats people until Komugi shows up to challenge him to a game of Gungi. Komugi, as stated before, is blind, so she doesn't go into their first match with any preconceived notions about Meruem. She has no idea he isn't human, so she treats him the way she would any other opponent. Komugi promptly defeats Meruem, much to the surprise of him and the audience. As the arc goes on, we see the two playing match after match after match, all of which Komugi emerges victorious from. There's an initial frustration to Meruem being defeated by a human he perceives to be incredibly stupid outside of the realm of Gungi, and it's understood that he intended to play against her until he finally won. As time goes on, we see Meruem slowly but surely demonstrating respect for Komugi, even allowing her to get half a day's rest so that she can be in top shape when they finally play. To him, victory would mean nothing if he defeated her while she's at a point of exhaustion. Through their matches and conversations, we see Meruem show his first glimmers of humanity, much to the dismay of a member of his royal guard, Poof. To Poof, Komugi is having a tangibly negative effect on the king, seeing firsthand how his attitude is slowly changing. There's a moment when Meruem asks Komugi to wager something on their match, and she stakes her life. However, she doesn't ask for anything in return if she were to win, which comes as a surprise to Meruem. In the face of her declaration, he realizes that he was the one lacking resolve and admits fault before canceling their wager and tearing off his own arm as a form of an apology for trying to shake her focus with fear. Komugi then demonstrates her own compassion by refusing to continue their match unless Meruem has his injury properly treated. He's not happy with being strong-armed into it, but he relents. The relationship continues this way, with push and pull from both until we reach the roller coaster of emotions that make up the final act of this arc. We'll begin with Meruem, since the two-pronged crux of his arc merges with Gon's at a specific point. Before the assault on the palace by the hunters, there's a scene in which Meruem intends to kill Komugi, having no further use for her. But when he arrives, he finds her being attacked by a rather rude bird, which he quickly disposes of. He finds her bloodied and injured and asks why she never called for help, to which she replies that it's because it was still early in the day and she didn't want to be a bother to anyone. Even though he'd gone there to kill her, Meruem ends up showing genuine concern for her safety after witnessing the bird attack. Externally, he tells her that she's not a bother to anyone and that she's an important guest. Internally, he questions why he's saying those things knowing he'd gone there to kill her. His brain and his heart are suddenly standing in direct opposition to each other, even though up to that point he operated strictly with his mind and brute strength. Yet Komugi's fragility and kindness stirred the compassion and tenderness in him. He realized that he saw her as someone to be protected, not as livestock. Then the hunters ransack the palace. In an attempt to separate the king from his guard, Killua's grandfather uses a pretty rad attack called Dragon Dive that pummels the vicinity with an end. Unfortunately, the hunters had no idea that Komugi was present, and she's critically wounded. From the way the scene is carried out, down to the way Meruem holds her body, the way his face is blacked out, and the silence that comes with it, we get a very direct emotional message that Meruem was devastated. He truly cared about Komugi, and the hunters present, along with Pito, could see it for themselves. The king's love for Komugi was so obvious that out of respect, the hunters that were there to kill him stood by as he tasked Pito with healing her. As we know, Gon eventually shows up to confront Pito and finds her healing Komugi, which doesn't go over well. Killua catches on that something isn't quite right and voices concern that Komugi was likely collateral damage from the Dragon Dive attack, which is why she's being healed. But Gon actually dismisses it, showing no regard for the life of an innocent bystander that just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time because she cared about the wrong person. Gon's urge to fight is so strong, his rage and guilt so deep, that he is willing to fight Pito anyway at the cost of Komugi's life. Now, this is Gon we're talking about, a kid that went out of his way to help others and even prevent his own friends from getting their hands dirty, who was willing to passively stain his own hands just for a shot at his ultimate enemy. It takes Killua calling him out for him to even entertain the notion of postponing his fight, reminding him that they can't help Kite if Gon kills Pito. He has to remind Gon about helping Kite, which is the entire reason they're there, but Gon's rage has him chomping at the bit to get his hands on Pito. Gon finally backs down, but he makes sure to belittle Killua in his own way before giving the idea some thought. Pito tells Gon that she needs 3 to 4 hours to completely heal Komugi, but Gon refuses to give her that time. She has to instead focus only on the girl's most critical wounds to shave the wait time down to an hour. Gon takes his seat a few feet away from Pito, so that when her time is up, he can force her to go along with his plans. At a point during the tense standoff, Poof shows up to kill Gon from behind, but Pito quickly shuts his plan down. She's very clearly frightened, to the confusion of Poof, but she explains that Gon had already noticed his presence. Had Poof approached Gon with the intent to kill, Gon would have immediately attacked Komugi. Not Poof or Pito, Komugi. Gon is in the mindset where he's more than willing to attack the defenseless human that King cares about because Pito killed someone he cares about. After Poof leaves, despite Gon instructing him to stay put, Gon calmly tells Pito that she has 10 fewer minutes to heal Komugi. It says quite a bit about Gon's state that his enemy is clearly frightened by how casually he moved up the deadline. Pito is sweating bullets and Gon hasn't flinched. Gon has come a long way since Kite's death, and it's turned a good kid into someone willing to be cruel in order to achieve his goal. If you take a close look at Gon during the entirety of his stay with Pito, he's sitting the exact same way that Meruem does. His sharp and concise sentences are a direct parallel to the way the king spoke before being influenced by Komugi. Fast forwarding to the actual battle between Gon and Pito, like we discussed last week, he gives in to the negative emotions whirling in him. He announces that he doesn't care if this is the end, which doesn't sound like the Gon we've come to know at all. Before we know it, Gon has transformed into his adult self and is beating Pito into a bloody mess with ease and without mercy. In a strange way, Gon is less human in that moment than his enemy. When you willingly take the life of another, you're giving up your humanity. Gon willingly traded away the very thing that made him so special to those around him so that he could satisfy his own guilt and rage. And of course, in pursuit of that goal, he willingly gave up his life as well. Mirroring the finale of Gon's arc, Meruem is at odds with the chairman of the Hunter Association, Netero. Unlike Gon though, Meruem shows no interest in actually fighting. He instead seeks to have an open discussion with the chairman, taking a seat in the dirt. Again, note the posture Meruem has. It's currently identical to Gon's. The chairman attacks, but Meruem stays true to his word and sits back down, refraining from battle. It isn't until Netero goads him with revealing the king's name that Meruem engages. The king, as of this point in the story, has never heard his own name, so the prospect of finding out entices him. Yet he intentionally holds back during the fight because the goal isn't to kill Netero, it's to force him to admit defeat so that he can get the information he wants. This is the character that slaughtered the very first humans he encountered and then immediately murdered a little girl. The same character that had no qualms about tearing his way out of his mother's body to free himself regardless of the state it would leave her in. Yet, here, we have that same character refusing to budge to anything but words and then scaling back to not kill his opponent. The Chimera ants, the king included, have human DNA in them, and the human side of Meruem is in full control. Meruem eventually proves victorious, but the chairman ends up with the last laugh as he triggers an explosive device kept in his heart. The explosion releases a deadly poison that slowly makes its way through Meruem's system. The allied hunters have recovered Komugi and have taken her somewhere away from the king, not quite understanding her connection to him. The king knows he's dying and wants nothing more than to spend his final moments with Komugi, so he seeks her out. He comes across a hunter named Palm, who has been turned into a Chimera ant. Palm assisted in securing Komugi and knows where she's being kept. In an attempt to peacefully get the information he wants, Meruem begins to kneel to Palm, something he'd had never done at the beginning of his arc. He's willing to put his pride aside and bow before a weaker creature to reach the woman he cares about. Meruem eventually makes his way to Komugi for a brief but beautiful and heartbreaking reunion. Komugi is also afflicted by the poison just from being in such close proximity to Meruem, and she holds him as he slowly dies. There's a very human kind of fear to Meruem as he fades, repeatedly calling out to Komugi just to make sure she's still there with him. She holds his hand and he asks her to call him by his name one last time, to which she says,
おやすみなさい。メルエム、私もすぐ行きますから。
Gon and Meruem's stories end on similar notes but with opposite results. They reach their emotional conclusions and then are both left on death's doorsteps. But where Meruem is cared for in his final moments by the woman that instilled him with his newfound humanity, Gon is met with the immense concern of his best friend who watched him trade his humanity away. One found love and peace, while the other found hatred and internal chaos. The antagonist became a creature that wanted nothing more than to care for and protect a frail human. The protagonist became a near unrecognizable monster that wanted nothing more than to inflict the same pain on his enemies that he felt. Consequences be damned. Both characters paid a high price for their humanity, having learned too late just what that price would be. Their perspectives were pushed beyond the scope of what either character was capable of reconciling with. Perhaps if Gon had taken a step back and processed his grief, he could have retained the humanity he relinquished, that piece of him forever gone, no matter how carefree he appears to be at the end of the anime. And perhaps if Meruem had taken the time to realize that humans were also creatures with hopes and dreams that offer more to the world than just being his food, he could have lived a much longer and peaceful life with the woman he came to care about. It wasn't until my second viewing of this arc that I noticed their arcs reversing the way they did. But needless to say, I applaud the brilliant writing here. Hunter x Hunter is an anime that I gave a lot of grief for various reasons, probably because I enjoy Yu Yu Hakusho much more. But this arc by itself is enough of a reason to give the show a watch. Between last week's theme and this week's, there's plenty of subtle things to pick up on, and I'm sure I overlooked an entire host of other things I could have mentioned here. Have you seen Hunter x Hunter from start to finish? Who's your favorite character and why? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.